In a further escalatory move in the Ukraine war, Estonia announced that the U.S. has deployed American troops near Russia's border. A U.S. infantry company arrived in the former Soviet Republic this past week as part of NATO's effort to boost its deterrence on the military alliance's eastern border, according to the Baltic countries' defense ministry. In a statement published on its website, the ministry announced that U.S. service members are stationed at Tara base in the town of Voru. One of its primary tasks, they said, is to train Estonian military personnel. Colonel Matti Tikripu, the commander of the 2nd Infantry Brigade of Estonia's defense forces, said he expects to be able to, quote, integrate our allies on a brigade level and gain an additional maneuver unit, closed quote. Colonel Richard Ikena, U.S. 1st Infantry Division artillery commander, said American troops are, quote, excited to be in Estonia, closed quote, and that they, quote, look forward to working shoulder to shoulder alongside our allies, closed quote. Washington is also expected to deploy a HIMARS platoon to Estonia, along with associated command and control equipment and systems. Meanwhile, as the U.S. says it plans to train not only the Estonian military, but another 500 Ukrainian soldiers a month in Germany, with a reported total of some 15,000 Ukrainians having been trained since April by Washington and its allies. RT's Igor Zhdanov spoke with a Ukrainian prisoner of war about the training he'd received in the UK. The interview carries the usual warning from any POW interviews that it, quote, may have been given under duress, closed quote. This is Igor Zhdanov.
UK prides itself for an overwhelming amount of support it's provided for Ukraine in the war against Russia. London has scooped its own stockpiles of weapons to near critical levels. It has brought tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers to Britain's training sites and claimed they've evolved into proper commandos. But now this myth is ready to bust. Overseas training did nothing for this fresh Ukrainian captive.
In September, they called me. I got a draft notice, and I joined the army.
What happened then?
I began training.
What training?
I was abroad in England.
How did you get there?
On a plane, they dropped us off somewhere in England. Then we rode a bus for around 9 hours.
Did the plane take off from Ukraine?
No, from Poland.
The British military training program was covered in an enticing veil of mystery. The lucky few who found themselves at the UK boot camp had no previous combat experience and had no idea of what was to come, but the expectations were high.
When we were drafted, we only went through a little athletic training. We were in a list in alphabetical order, and the first 180 were sent to England. Those who were further down the list stayed.
Were there any who served in the military among those 180 recruits?
1 or 2.
Day one of training kicked off in a promising manner. Cadets received a full set of gear, from armored vests to undershirts that they got to keep too. But it all went downhill from there. The trainees who expected to learn military cunning were taken to Class 101, at which most were spectacularly bad.
We had instructors from Sweden.
What exercises did you have?
It's a funny thing. For 2 days, they taught us how to hold a weapon.
If, as you say, none of the 180 recruits had ever held weapons in their hands, maybe that was the right thing to do.
The instructors were shocked. I worked with wood, and the others worked in IT or somewhere else. It's like when you get an ABC book in first grade. When people see a weapon for the first time in their life, it's hard for them to handle it. They were always shouting, "You'll shoot one of your own like that."
What did you do next?
We were learning how to disassemble weapons, then the tactics of movement.
What machinery did you learn to use?
No machinery.
No?
We only learned to use British rifles and AK-47s and the NLAW grenade launcher.
Did you shoot the NLAW?
We had copies. Nobody would give us real launchers.
What kind of training did you expect?
We expected more.
What exactly did you imagine before getting there?
Personally, I expected something else. Sometimes it wasn't even interesting.
A month of training passed quickly. It was time to head back to Ukraine. Instead of a well-coordinated unit, the Ukrainian command got a mob in fancy uniform with discipline issues.
30 of us joined one squadron. From what I understood, they sent us to a squadron that suffered heavy losses.
How did those trained in England get along with the others?
There were no conflicts.
No conflicts? And between those trained?
There were conflicts between ourselves.
Tell me about that.
There were polemics about who is higher up. Maybe somebody wanted to present himself in a better way. People threatened each other.
Threatened?
Yes.
Why?
Somebody wouldn't like the other person pointing at something. Why are you doing this? I'll cut off your finger.
What do you mean didn't like that the other person pointing at something?
Or, for example, conflicts along the lines of, I put a vase somewhere and you put it somewhere else. Why? And the conflict rages on. Such disputes over little things happen, maybe because the people are at war.
It wasn't long until the time came to put the skills learned to the test. And the very first combat encounter revealed that the reality of war in the Donbass is drastically different from the drill site simulations.
We were tasked to clear the wood. Things went badly there. We didn't even have time to jump off the infantry fighting vehicle. Artillery started to hit us. The fire was very intense.
Did you use any of the skills that you learned in England? Or at least tried to?
No.
Why?
There was nowhere to use them. We went forward and the artillery hit us. I just got down, then stood up, looked around, ran a bit, then got down, and so on. Later they said to us to change position. It was around 150 meters from the main forces. We got there, got in a trench, and came under fire. They fired everything they had at us. There were 5 of us left. The deputy commander had a radio set. He asked for help, but there wasn't any. I was injured, but not evacuated. The one with the radio set said, "I'll come back later." He went and never returned. Then 2 of us were killed in a strike. The other one was killed when he tried to move back, so I was left injured and alone. After a little time, I heard the calls to surrender. I raised my hands, and that's it.
It's hardly this man's fault that Swedish instructors failed to turn him, a handyman, into an effective fighter within a month's time. But at least he was lucky to keep his life and learn his lesson.
When I return home, I won't go to war anymore.
What if you are mobilized again?
If they will threaten me with jail, I'll refuse. The commanders let me down. I left on my own.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.